What is up guys, Morton here from SteamFirst.com with a review for the 2D action platformer Akane the Kunoichi, developed by Haruneko Entertainment and released May 2nd, 2014 on Steam for $3. For those wondering, the title means Akane the female ninja, which tells us that the main character is Akane and that she is a ninja. So with that in mind, what exactly is this game about? Well, basically you're a ninja and somehow you have an infinite number of kunais, which are basically throwing knives, and your goal is to get to the end of each stage without dying. You can take 4 hits from enemies or obstacles, and every once in a while you find health or power-ups hidden inside breakable blocks. All in all, the gameplay is actually pretty fun. There's only 15 levels, and 5 of those are boss levels, but it's a pretty good amount. The stages are varied, and they're relatively short. Each one has a 5-minute timer, and I think if you run out of time you lose, but honestly I completed all the stages without even coming close to running out of time, so I don't really think it's anything to ever worry about. Each stage has 3 kimonos, including boss stages, which are optional to pick up. There's an achievement for them and such, but that's about it. They do add an increased difficulty though, something the earlier stages need and the later stages really don't. There are 4 types of enemies in the game: a dog that runs fast, a green guy that walks at you, an orange guy that throws knives at you, and a guy that throws his hat at you. All the enemies die in 3 hits, and that's it for the entire game excluding bosses. So the way that the difficulty curves is basically just more and more enemies appear at a time, so by the end you'll end up with like 8 people throwing knives at you all at once, and you need to avoid it while also finding time to hit them and not jumping into spikes or into endless pits. It goes from fun to kind of annoying when they keep throwing more and more enemies at you. If they had just added more types of enemies, or made more difficult enemies, it would have been a lot more fun than just having the entire screen filled with people. And as I mentioned, you can only get hit 4 times before you die and restart the level. Getting hit gives you a few seconds of invulnerability, so you can run away if you need to, but if you run without killing the enemies, you'll probably just get hit again anyway. Sometimes you can find power-ups that refill a lost heart, but they're pretty rare, so most of the time you only have the 4 hearts you start the level with. So if you need to go through a level, and if you're collecting all the kimonos, which are usually pretty far apart, it can be pretty challenging to not get hit 4 times, at least in the later levels. Overall though, the gameplay is enjoyable. It can get a tad repetitive, especially later on when you can play a level for 2 to 3 minutes and then die near the end and have to replay the entire level again, but none of the deaths felt cheap. If I got hit, it was my fault. The controls are solid and all the physics are good. Gameplay gets a 4 out of 5. It can be repetitive at times, but it's fun when you're progressing, and the bosses are fun and a nice change of pace. Visually, the game looks really cool. One of the tags on Steam for this game is anime, and it shows when you look at it. It's obviously inspired by Japanese art, and they did a really good job with it. It's still an indie game, so it's certainly not amazingly high quality or super realistic, but it looks good. The level stages are varied too, going from an ice stage to a castle, for example, so it doesn't get boring to look at. Graphics get a 4.5 out of 5. I really don't have any complaints with the graphics. The sounds are also pretty good. The sound effects are more or less average, but the soundtrack is really good. Sometimes the sound effects seem to have weird issues though, like in some levels the spikes in the ground would make a noise when they were going to pop up or go back down, but sometimes the sound would just stop so it was impossible to know when you needed to move. Sound gets a 3.5 out of 5. The soundtrack was great, but the other issues were pretty annoying. There's not a whole lot to say as far as story goes. Basically, Akane's master Goro got kidnapped and it's up to you to find him and get him back. Apparently Akane is stronger than her master though, because she can pretty easily defeat everyone that gets in her way, including the person that actually kidnapped Goro to begin with. The story never really gets mentioned outside of an opening cutscene and ending cutscene though. The story gets a 2.5 out of 5. It's actually there and has some purpose, which is good I guess, but they hardly mention it at all in game, and there's literally no character development or anything like that. As for replayability, the only reason to revisit any of the stages would be either for achievements or to collect all the kimonos if you skip them the first time through. There's no scoreboard or point system or anything like that. Replayability gets a 2 out of 5. There's achievements in the kimonos, which is more than a lot of games have, but that's about it. They could have easily had some type of system that kept track of time so you could compete with your own times, or even an online scoreboard, but for some reason they didn't add that. Overall, Akane the Kunoichi is a fun, although sometimes repetitive, 2D platformer. There's a lot to like and not a whole lot to complain about. Everything works well and the level design is varied enough to keep things interesting throughout the game. Akane the Kunoichi gets a 4 out of 5. There really aren't very many flaws other than potentially the length. You can probably beat the game in a little over an hour if you aren't trying to collect all the kimonos, and probably 2 to 3 hours if you are. But it's also only $3, and it's really hard not to recommend this game for that price.